They say money can't buy you class, but apparently some people think it can buy them the right to judge. A young black kid sits in first class, minding his own business, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans. To one woman, he's a problem, an eyesore who obviously doesn't belong. She gets him kicked out of his seat feeling smug and victorious. But she made one colossal mistake. She had no idea who his father was. Stick around to see how a $40 million corporate contract, one viral video, and a CEO dad looking for more than just an apology brought her entire world crashing down. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about a reckoning. "Well, look what we have here," Caroline Covington murmured to herself, the words a venomous pearl of thought forming in her mind. "The charity cases are flying first class now." Her gaze, sharp and unforgiving as a shard of glass, was fixed on the young man who had just settled into seat 2B. He was across the aisle and one row ahead of her in the opulent first-class cabin of Transatlantic Airways flight TA330 from New York to London. Everything about him screamed that he didn't belong. He was young, maybe 16 or 17, and black. He was wearing a plain gray hoodie, slightly baggy jeans, and a pair of high-end, but still casual sneakers. On his head were a pair of state-of-the-art Bose noise-canceling headphones, from which a muffled, bass-heavy beat was just barely audible. To Caroline, it was a portrait of insolence. She, a senior partner at a prestigious Manhattan wealth management firm, had earned her place in seat 3A. She'd earned it through 80-hour work weeks, through ruthless negotiations, and through carefully curating an image of unimpeachable success. Her cream-colored Chanel suit, her Cartier watch, and her Hermès Birkin bag, resting delicately by her feet, weren't just accessories. They were armor. They were symbols that told the world exactly who she was and why she deserved the plush leather seat, the pre-flight champagne, and the deferential smiles from the cabin crew. The boy in her eyes had earned nothing. He was probably flying on some kind of misbooked economy ticket, a system glitch that had landed him, bewildered and undeserving, amongst his betters. Or worse, he was a freeloader, a beneficiary of some diversity and inclusion program that handed out privileges like party favors. He hadn't even looked at the flight attendant offering him a glass of orange juice or champagne. He'd simply given a slight nod, his eyes closed, lost in his music. The sheer disrespect of it all made Caroline's blood simmer. The boy's name was Leo Sinclair. He was, in fact, 17, and he was exhausted. He'd just finished his final exams at a demanding private school, and this trip to London with his father was his reward. His dad was already in the airport's exclusive executive lounge, finishing a last-minute conference call. He'd told Leo to board ahead of him. "Just get settled in, son. I'll be there before they close the doors. Don't let anyone bother you." Leo had no intention of bothering anyone. The headphones were his sanctuary, a shield against the world. He was listening to a new album from his favorite artist, trying to decompress from the stress of the last few weeks. He was vaguely aware of the woman staring at him from across the aisle, but he was used to it. He was often the only black face in expensive restaurants, exclusive clubs, or, indeed, first-class cabins. He'd learned long ago that the best defense was to simply exist, to take up the space he was entitled to and ignore the daggers of judgment. Caroline, however, was not the type of person to be ignored. She watched as a flight attendant, a harried-looking man in his late 30s named Marcus, moved down the aisle. "Excuse me," Caroline said, her voice cutting through the quiet cabin hum. It wasn't loud, but it had a piercing quality that demanded attention. Marcus stopped, forcing a professional smile. "Yes, ma'am. Can I get you another glass of champagne?" "No, thank you," she said, gesturing subtly with her chin towards Leo. "I just have a concern about the seating." Marcus glanced at Leo, then back at Caroline. "Is there a problem with your seat, ma'am?" "My seat is fine," she said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, loud enough for the passenger next to her to hear. "It's his seat I'm worried about. Are you sure he's supposed to be here? I think there may have been a mistake. Perhaps he's wandered up from the back of the plane." Marcus's smile tightened. This was the part of the job he hated. He was an in-charge flight attendant, meaning he was the lead for the cabin. But on these transatlantic routes, first class was often a minefield of entitlement. He had to placate egos, soothe anxieties, and deal with complaints that ranged from the temperature of the cashews to the thread count of the blankets. A confrontation over seating was the last thing he needed. His shift had already started badly, with a catering delay and a sick call from another crew member, leaving them short-staffed. He looked at Leo, the hoodie, the headphones, the casual posture. Then he looked at Caroline, the suit, the watch, the imperious expression. In the calculus of customer service, a quick and biased equation formed in his mind. She looked like money in trouble. The boy looked like a potential misunderstanding that could be easily rectified. Appease the person most likely to file a formal and damaging complaint. "I can look into it, ma'am," Marcus said placatingly. "Please do," Caroline said, settling back into her seat with a satisfied smirk. She had set the wheels in motion. Justice, in her worldview, was about to be served. Marcus approached Leo's seat. He tapped him gently on the shoulder. Leo, startled, pulled one side of his headphones off. "Yeah?" "Excuse me, young man. I need to see your boarding pass," Marcus said, his tone clipped and impersonal. Leo blinked, confused. Sure." He reached into the pocket of his hoodie, pulled out his phone, and unlocked it to show the digital boarding pass. It clearly read, "Sinclair, Leo, Seat 2B, First Class." Marcus glanced at it, but his mind was already clouded by Caroline's suggestion. He saw the name, the seat number, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Was it a fake? A glitch? "I'm going to need to verify this with the gate agent," Marcus said, his professional demeanor slipping into one of suspicion. "There seems to be some confusion about the seat." "Confusion?" Leo asked, his voice rising slightly. "It's my seat. My dad booked it." "We'll see about that," Marcus said dismissively. "Please wait here." He walked away, leaving Leo sitting in a pool of sudden, unwelcome attention. The man next to Caroline shot him a pitying look. A businessman in 1A pointedly looked away, burying his face in the Financial Times. Leo felt a hot flush of shame and anger creep up his neck. His father's words echoed in his head. "Don't let anyone bother you." Easier said than done. Caroline watched the entire exchange, her smirk widening. She saw the boy's discomfort and interpreted it as guilt. She felt a surge of validation. She was the guardian of this sacred space, the protector of its exclusivity. Marcus returned a few minutes later, his expression even more strained. The gate agent had confirmed the ticket was valid, but had added that the corporate account that booked it, Sinclair Technologies, was one of their biggest. This only confused Marcus more. Maybe the kid was the son of some junior executive, but he didn't look the part. His prejudice was now actively fighting against the facts in front of him. Caroline, noticing his return and his hesitation, decided to press her advantage. "Well," she called out, loud enough for the whole cabin to hear, "is he going to be moved? Some of us paid a great deal of money for our tickets, and we expect a certain ambiance, a certain level of security." The word security hung in the air, thick and ugly. It recategorized Leo from a simple misunderstanding to a potential threat. The accusation struck Leo like a physical blow. Security? Because he was a black kid in a hoodie? He looked at Marcus, his eyes pleading. "Sir, I haven't done anything. This is my assigned seat." The other passengers were now openly staring. It was becoming a scene. Marcus felt his authority slipping. He needed to resolve this now. And in that moment of high pressure and low staffing, he made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He sided with the aggressor. "Young man," Marcus said, his voice now firm and official, "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. We can sort this out at the front." "Sort what out?" Leo protested, his voice cracking with a mixture of adolescent indignation and genuine hurt. "You saw my ticket." "There is a discrepancy. Now, are you going to come quietly, or do I need to involve the captain and airport security?" Marcus threatened, his voice low. The mention of security again, this time as a direct threat, was the final humiliation. Leo felt the eyes of every passenger on him. He saw the smug, triumphant look on Caroline's face. He knew he had two choices: cause an even bigger scene and risk being forcibly removed from the plane, or suffer the indignity in silence. Thinking of his father and not wanting to create a problem that he would have to deal with, Leo made his choice. He swallowed his pride, which tasted like ash in his mouth. He slowly stood up, grabbing his phone. "Fine," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "Leave your bag," Marcus commanded. "We don't know if you'll be returning to this seat." Numbly, Leo left his backpack on the seat and followed Marcus down the aisle, past the rows of averted eyes and judgmental stares. He was led to the galley area near the cockpit, a cramped, sterile space that felt like a holding cell. He was told to stand there and wait. Caroline Covington watched him go, a profound sense of satisfaction washing over her. The natural order had been restored. She took a long, slow sip of her champagne. It tasted like victory. She glanced at her watch. They would be taking off soon. She settled in, ready to enjoy her peaceful, well-deserved flight to London. She had no idea that in less than 15 minutes, her perfectly curated world was about to be systematically dismantled by the very man who had told his son not to let anyone bother him. Robert Sinclair switched off his phone, concluding a call that had just secured a new multi-million-dollar distribution deal in the UK. He was a man who moved with an economy of motion and a quiet intensity that people often mistook for aloofness. It wasn't. It was focus. At 48, he was the founder and CEO of Sinclair Technologies, a titan in the world of cybersecurity and data analytics. His company was known for its innovation, its aggressive growth, and its founder's meticulous attention to detail. Robert noticed everything. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit, but he'd taken off the jacket, draping it over his carry-on. His tie was slightly loosened. He looked less like a corporate raider and more like a weary professor, an image that had often led his competitors to underestimate him, usually to their great detriment. As he walked down the jet bridge, he felt a familiar sense of anticipation. These trips with Leo were precious. Since his wife had passed away 5 years prior, the bond between father and son had become the central pillar of his life. He worked relentlessly, but he always carved out this time. It was their time to reconnect, to talk about everything and nothing, to just be a father and a son, away from the pressures of their lives in New York. He stepped onto the aircraft and turned left into the first-class cabin. The first thing he noticed was the atmosphere. It was tense. The hushed, relaxed ambiance he was used to was replaced by a strange, crackling energy, the aftermath of a disturbance. He saw a woman in a Chanel suit sipping champagne with an air of smug finality. He saw a few other passengers pointedly avoiding eye contact. Then he saw seat 2B, his son's seat. It was empty, save for Leo's familiar gray backpack. A cold knot of unease formed in Robert's stomach. He scanned the cabin. No Leo. He was supposed to be right there, lost in his music. Robert's eyes immediately found the lead flight attendant, Marcus, who was speaking in hushed tones to another crew member in the galley. Marcus looked stressed, his face pale. Robert walked towards them, his carry-on rolling silently behind him. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was calm, but it had a natural baritone authority that made both attendants turn instantly. "Good afternoon, sir," Marcus said, trying to paste on his customer service smile. "Welcome aboard." "I'm looking for my son," Robert said simply. "He was supposed to be in seat 2B. He gestured towards the empty seat. Marcus's face went from pale to ghostly white. The name on the manifest he'd argued with the gate agent about, Sinclair, clicked into place with the powerful, impeccably dressed man standing before him. The corporate account. Sinclair Technologies. Oh, God. Your son?" Marcus stammered. "Yes, Leo Sinclair. He's 17. Where is he?" Robert's gaze was level, patient, but utterly unyielding. It was the same gaze he used in boardrooms when a subordinate was trying to hide a catastrophic error. Before Marcus could formulate a lie, a small voice came from the side. "Dad!" Robert turned. Leo was standing by the cockpit door, looking small and defeated. The sight sent a jolt of pure, cold fury through Robert, an emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. He saw the humiliation in his son's eyes, the slumped shoulders, the shame that had no business being there. He walked over to Leo, ignoring the flight attendants completely. He put a hand on his son's shoulder. "Leo, what happened? Are you okay?" "This flight attendant," Leo said, his voice quiet but steady now that his father was here. He He said there was a problem with my ticket. That woman, Leo nodded towards Caroline Covington. She complained. She said I didn't belong here. They were going to call security. Robert's eyes slowly moved from his son's face to Marcus, and then with glacial slowness, they settled on Caroline. She was still watching, but the smirk was gone, replaced by a dawning look of confusion and apprehension. She saw the way this man looked at the boy, the way he stood. She saw the suit, the quiet confidence that radiated power far more effectively than her own expensive clothes ever could. Robert held her gaze for a long moment. He didn't say a word to her. He didn't need to. He simply catalogued her face. Then he turned his full attention back to Marcus. "You are the in-charge flight attendant for this cabin?" Robert asked. His voice was dangerously soft. Yes, sir. I'm Marcus Thorne." He managed to get out, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Marcus Thorne," Robert repeated, committing the name to memory. "My son Leo had a valid, paid-for, first-class ticket for seat 2B. You saw his boarding pass. It wasn't a question. And on the complaint of another passenger, you chose to remove him from his seat and threaten him with security?" "Sir, it was a misunderstanding," Marcus began, his voice desperate. "The passenger expressed a concern for safety, and I was just following procedure to de-escalate." "De-escalate?" Robert interrupted, his voice dropping even lower. "De-escalate what exactly? My son sitting quietly in his assigned seat, listening to music? What was the threat you were attempting to neutralize? His hoodie? Or was it something else?" The accusation was plain. Marcus flinched as if he'd been struck. Caroline Covington finally found her voice. This was not going the way she had planned. The situation needed her brand of assertive damage control. She stood up, smoothing her suit jacket. "There now," she said, attempting a tone of breezy reasonableness. "It was just a simple mix-up. The young man just didn't seem... Well, he didn't seem like he was in the right cabin. I was merely looking out for everyone's well-being. No harm done." Robert turned his head slowly to face her. The look in his eyes was one of pure analytical contempt. It was the look a biologist might give a particularly loathsome specimen under a microscope. "No harm done?" he echoed, the words dripping with ice. "You publicly humiliated a child. You profiled him. You baselessly accused him of being a threat. And you instigated his removal from a seat that he is more entitled to than you can possibly imagine. And you think there has been no harm done?" The cabin was now dead silent. Every passenger was locked onto the drama unfolding. The businessman in 1A had lowered his newspaper. The pitying man next to Caroline's old seat looked horrified. "Now see here," Caroline began, her voice regaining its usual sharpness. "I don't know who you think you are." "I am Robert Sinclair," he said, cutting her off cleanly. "I am this boy's father, and my company, Sinclair Technologies, happens to have a corporate travel account with this airline that is worth, on average, $40 million a year. It's an account that I personally negotiated and that I can personally terminate with a single phone call. Now," he turned back to Marcus, whose face was now ashen, "I believe it's time for you to call your captain, and then I suggest you get your groundside station manager on the phone, because this flight will not be moving from this gate until this is resolved. And trust me," he added, his eyes sweeping over both Marcus and Caroline, "it will be resolved." He put his arm around Leo's shoulder and guided him back towards his seat. "Go on, son. Sit down. This is your seat." As Leo slid back into 2B, the tension in the cabin didn't dissipate. It transformed. The awkward discomfort had sharpened into the electric thrill of impending doom. Everyone knew they were about to witness a reckoning. Caroline Covington slowly sank back into her seat, the triumphant taste of champagne now a bitter poison on her tongue. She had picked a fight with a boy in a hoodie, and she had just found out he was the son of a king. The air in the first-class cabin of Flight TA-330 had grown heavy and still, thick with a tension that seemed to absorb sound. The jet bridge remained clamped to the fuselage like a metal claw, a physical manifestation of the holding pattern they were all trapped in. The remaining flight attendants moved with a strained, artificial quiet, avoiding the aisle where Robert Sinclair stood like a statue of controlled fury beside his son. A frantic, hushed conversation had taken place via the intercom between Marcus and the cockpit, and now the entire cabin waited for the inevitable consequence. The first to emerge from the front of the aircraft was Captain Eva Rostova. She was a woman who commanded respect before she even spoke. In her mid-50s, with strands of silver woven through her dark hair, which was pulled back in a severe, immaculate bun, she possessed an air of unshakable competence honed over 25 years of flying commercial jets. She had navigated microbursts over the Rockies and engine failures over the vast, dark expanse of the Pacific. Her presence was a calming force in any crisis. But as she stepped into the cabin, her sharp eyes performed a swift, analytical sweep, and her expression was anything but calm. It was a mask of cold, professional anger. She saw it all in an instant. The terrified, guilt-stricken pallor of her lead flight attendant, Marcus Thorne, the smug entitlement beginning to curdle into apprehension on the face of the woman in the Chanel suit, the quiet, profound humiliation in the eyes of the young boy now sitting back in his seat, and finally, the man standing beside him. He was dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored suit, and his posture was relaxed, yet he radiated an aura of immense power that was more potent than any overt display of aggression. This was not a man you placated. This was a man you answered to. "Mr. Sinclair?" Captain Rostova's voice was even and clear, cutting through the silence. "I am Captain Rostova. I was informed there was a disturbance." Robert, who had been speaking in a low, reassuring tone to Leo, straightened to his full height. He met her gaze with one of mutual, professional respect. "Captain, thank you for coming. Disturbance is a mild word for it. Your employee, acting on the baseless, discriminatory complaint of another passenger, removed my 17-year-old son from his confirmed, paid-for seat. He was publicly shamed and threatened with airport security for the crime of listening to music while black." Captain Rostova's gaze swiveled to Marcus, and it was like being pinned by a laser. "Marcus," she began, her voice dropping to a dangerously low frequency. "Report. What specific protocol did you follow when you decided to remove a ticketed passenger from his assigned seat?" "Captain, I made a judgment call," Marcus stammered, his eyes darting everywhere but at her. "The passenger in 3A expressed a security concern. I was attempting to de-escalate the situation before it became a problem." "A security concern?" Rostova pressed, taking a step closer. "Did you witness any threatening behavior from the passenger in 2B? Did he utter threats? Did he refuse to comply with a crew instruction prior to your intervention? On what specific grounds, Mr. Thorne, did you invoke a security issue?" "Well, no, but the other passenger felt unsafe, and the optics. I thought it was best to separate them and verify." "You thought," Rostova interrupted, her voice sharp as steel. "You did not follow procedure. Procedure would be to verify the passenger's boarding pass and manifest details discreetly, and, if they match, reassure the complaining passenger. You chose instead to validate a discriminatory complaint and escalate a situation from zero to a flight-delaying incident that now requires my personal intervention. You have failed, Mr. Thorne. You have failed in your duties. You have failed that boy, and you have failed this airline." Marcus physically flinched, all the color draining from his face. Before he could respond, a new figure hustled down the jet bridge and onto the plane. He was a man in his late 40s, his suit slightly rumpled, a sheen of sweat on his brow. His ID badge identified him as Richard Davies, the airport's on-duty station manager. He had clearly run from his office, summoned by a panicked call from the gate agent about an unfolding disaster involving their biggest corporate client. "Mr. Sinclair, Captain Rostova," he panted, his eyes wide with anxiety. "Richard Davies, I came as soon as I heard. Sir, on behalf of Transatlantic Airways, I am so sorry for any misunderstanding. Whatever the issue is, I assure you, we will fix it." Robert turned his calm, analytical gaze on the new arrival. "Richard," he said, his tone that of a CEO addressing a subordinate who had just lost a major account, "the time for fixing a misunderstanding has passed. What this is a systemic failure, a failure of training, a failure of policy, and a failure of basic human decency. Your airline markets itself as a premium, global brand that values its customers. But it seems that value is conditional. My son was treated not as a premium customer, but as a presumed threat. And that didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because he gestured with his chin toward Carolyn, felt empowered to voice her prejudice, and he nodded at Marcus, felt empowered to act on it. So tell me, Richard, what voucher or apology is going to fix that? This was too much for Caroline. Her entire sense of righteous indignation boiled over. This was her world, her cabin, and she was being painted as the villain. She stood up, smoothing her suit jacket in a gesture of defiance. Now see here, she announced, her voice regaining its familiar, piercing tone. I will not be slandered. I am the victim of a hostile confrontation. I am a platinum medallion flyer, Richard. I spend over $100,000 a year with this airline. I expressed a legitimate concern. The boy was acting suspiciously, hiding under a hoodie, ignoring the crew. He was not dressed appropriately for a first-class cabin. I was thinking of everyone's safety. Robert let her finish, his expression unchanging. When she was done, a deathly quiet fell once more. He then turned his head slowly, letting his gaze drift over the other passengers. A legitimate concern for safety, Robert repeated, his voice deceptively soft. He looked at the businessman in 1A, who was now staring openly over the top of his newspaper. Ma'am, were you concerned for your safety when this gentleman in the Brioni suit boarded and immediately began reading his paper, ignoring the crew? He glanced at a woman in 2D who was typing furiously on a laptop. Or were you concerned about this lady who has not looked up from her screen once? Her headphones are on, just like my son's were. He paused, then his eyes locked back onto Caroline's. Or was your deep concern for safety, your keen eye for suspicious behavior, laser-focused on the only black child in this cabin? Please enlighten us all. What specific threat did he pose that these other passengers did not? Caroline Covington opened her mouth, then closed it. Her face, a mask of haughty confidence moments before, crumpled. She had been so certain of her status, her unimpeachable judgment. But under the weight of his simple, logical questioning, her entire worldview was exposed for the ugly, racist sham it was. There was no answer. She looked around for support, but found only condemnation and pity in the eyes of her fellow passengers. She had been expertly, clinically, and publicly dismantled. Captain Rostova had seen enough. She stepped forward, her authority absolute. Mr. Davies, she said, her voice ringing with finality, this passenger has violated federal air regulations by harassing another passenger and interfering with the duties of a flight crew. She is a liability to the safe operation of this aircraft. Please escort her off my plane. Now. What? Caroline shrieked, the sound tearing through the cabin. You're kicking me off? Me? After what I've been through? This is outrageous. I am the customer. You were a customer, Captain Rostova corrected her, her face like granite. You are now a security risk. Your journey with Transatlantic Airways ends here. Get your things. The sheer, unadulterated humiliation of the moment finally crashed down upon Caroline. The very outcome she had so smugly engineered for Leo was now her own, magnified 100-fold. Richard Davies, looking miserable but obedient, gestured to two ground crew members who had appeared behind him. As Caroline snatched her Hermes bag from the floor, her movements jerky with rage, she shot a final venomous look at Robert. You will be hearing from my lawyers, all of you. This is assault, she hissed. I look forward to their correspondence, Robert said quietly, his voice devoid of any emotion. As she was led up the jet bridge, a walk of pure shame, the entire cabin watched in silence. The silence of a crowd that has just witnessed a public execution. When she was gone, Robert turned his attention back to the airline staff. The immediate symptom had been removed, but the disease remained. Mr. Sinclair, Richard Davies began, wringing his hands. Please allow us to offer our most profound apologies. We can refund your tickets, of course. We can offer you and your son a book of international first-class vouchers, a personal apology from our CEO. Robert held up a hand, and Davies instantly fell silent. Richard, he said, a note of incredulity in his voice, my son was just treated like a criminal on your aircraft. Do you honestly think the solution is a coupon for a free toaster? I am not interested in compensation. I am interested in consequences. Real ones. He looked from Davies to Rostova, his demeanor shifting entirely into that of a CEO laying down the terms of a hostile takeover. My company, Sinclair Technologies, has a corporate account with this airline. That account is responsible for approximately $40 million of your annual revenue, an account that, as of this moment, is under review. However, I am a man who believes in solutions, not just problems. So here is my proposal. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I will be speaking with your CEO, Patricia Logan, when we land. I will propose a partnership. My company will provide the $5 million seed funding to create what we will call the Sinclair Initiative. It will be a mandatory, top-to-bottom reimagining of this airline's DEI and customer sensitivity training designed by the best minds in the field. It will have measurable metrics for success and clear, immediate consequences for failure. If I have a firm, actionable plan on my desk within 30 days that demonstrates your absolute commitment to this change, Sinclair Technologies will retain its account. If not, I will personally call our travel department and instruct them to book all future corporate travel, all $40 million of it, with your competitor. The choice is yours. It was an audacious, breathtaking power play. Davies and Rostova could only stare, stunned into silence. He wasn't just demanding they fix a problem. He was dictating the terms of the solution and making them pay for it, all while holding a financial gun to their heads. Then Robert's gaze fell upon Marcus, who looked as though he was about to faint. As for you, Mr. Thorne, Robert said, his voice becoming quiet again, I don't want you fired. Marcus looked up, a flicker of disbelief in his terrified eyes. No, Robert continued. Firing you is the easy way out. It's a press release for the airline. It allows them to say they took swift action and sweep the real issue under the rug. It lets you become a martyr in your own story. I am not interested in what is easy. I am interested in what is effective. You will be the first employee enrolled in the Sinclair Initiative. You will sit in that classroom and you will learn in excruciating detail why your judgment call was an act of prejudice. You will listen to stories, you will be forced to confront your biases, and you will understand the weight of the humiliation you inflicted on my son today. Your career doesn't depend on keeping your job. It depends on your capacity to become a better human being. That is my price for your employment. He had laid out all his terms. There was nothing left to say. He placed a reassuring hand on Leo's shoulder and sat down in seat 2C. He buckled his seatbelt. Now, Robert Sinclair said, looking towards the cockpit, I believe we have a schedule to keep. Captain, if you are satisfied, we are ready to depart. In seat 4F, David Chen slowly lowered the phone he had been using to discreetly record the entire exchange. His heart was pounding. He hadn't just captured a viral video of a Karen getting her comeuppance. He had recorded the anatomy of a masterclass in power, a story not just of prejudice, but of a brilliant, strategic, and constructive response. He already had his headline. This was going to be huge. He hit save, the digital click sealing the fate of everyone involved. The 7-hour journey to London passed in a state of suspended animation. For the passengers of Flight TA-30's first-class cabin, the explosive drama of the departure had left an indelible mark, transforming the atmosphere from one of relaxed luxury to that of a library after a shocking argument. Whispers were exchanged, but gazes were furtive. Every passenger was acutely aware of the two Sinclairs in seats 2B and 2C, and the ruined flight attendant, Marcus Thorne, who moved through the cabin like a phantom. Marcus performed his duties with the brittle precision of an automaton. He refilled water glasses, offered warm towels, and presented meal trays, but his eyes were vacant, fixed on a point somewhere in the middle distance. Each time his route took him past the Sinclairs, a visible wave of anxiety radiated from him. He would angle his body away, offering service to the passenger across the aisle, avoiding eye contact at all costs. He was a man trapped in his own personal hell at 35,000 feet, forced to serve the very people whose lives he had disrupted, under the watchful eye of a captain who he knew now held him in utter contempt. His internal monologue was a chaotic storm of self-pity, blame, and a creeping, terrifying dread. It was her fault, a voice in his head screamed, thinking of Caroline. She pushed me. I was just trying to keep control. But another, quieter voice whispered the devastating truth. You had a choice. You saw a boy, and you saw a problem. And you were wrong. Leo sat beside his father, a pair of airline-issued earbuds in, though he wasn't listening to anything. He was replaying the incident in a torturous loop, dissecting every frame. The condescending sneer on Caroline's face, the weary impatience of Marcus, the averted eyes of the other passengers, the hot, creeping shame that had felt like a physical illness. He then contrasted it with the arrival of his father, a shift in the atmospheric pressure of the entire cabin. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't threatened or postured. His power was a gravitational force, calm and absolute, bending the situation to his will. Leo felt a confusing mix of pride and a new, heavy awareness. He glanced at his dad, who was reading a dense report on a tablet, seemingly unperturbed, but Leo could see the tension in his jaw. Meanwhile, a few rows back, in seat 4F, David Chen was working with the furious energy of a journalist on the cusp of a career-defining scoop. He wasn't just a blogger, he was a freelance videographer who sold compelling footage to news outlets. And this was gold. He meticulously edited the video on his laptop, sharpening the audio of Caroline's piercing voice, adding captions to clarify the context. He chose the most damning thumbnail, Caroline mid-shriek, pointing an accusatory finger as she was escorted off the plane. He drafted the accompanying text, careful to be factual but dramatic. He described the victim as a quiet teenager and the aggressor as a wealthy passenger. He identified Robert Sinclair not just as a father, but as the CEO of the renowned Sinclair Technologies. And he included the detail about the $40 million corporate account. It was a perfect storm of class, race, and corporate power. As the plane began its descent into London and the command to enable flight mode was lifted, David Chen connected to his personal Wi-Fi hotspot. With a deep breath and a triumphant click, he unleashed his story upon the world. The video didn't just go viral, it detonated. Within 10 minutes, it was rocketing across Twitter, shared by tech influencers who recognized Robert Sinclair's name, and by social justice accounts who recognized the ugly, familiar pattern of racism. Within 30 minutes, major news desks in both the UK and US were clamoring for licensing rights. By the time the wheels of Flight TA-30 touched down at Heathrow, David Chen's video had surpassed 2 million views. You're on First Class Karen, Ordonage Sinclair CEO, and Racism on TA-30 were the top 3 trending topics globally. The internet, with its ravenous appetite for justice, had found its villain and its hero. Carolyn Covington, having endured a miserable 6-hour wait and a subsequent flight in a cramped business class seat, landed an hour after the Sinclairs. Her mind was a cauldron of indignant rage. She spent the entire flight composing furious letters in her head, planning lawsuits against the airline for her mistreatment and against Robert Sinclair for defamation. She felt victimized, wronged, a pillar of society unfairly maligned. She switched her phone off airplane mode as her car service sped towards the city, ready to call her managing partner, Richard Finch, and begin her righteous crusade. Her phone did not just turn on, it convulsed in her hand as if seized by a poltergeist. A relentless machine gun-like series of vibrations signaled a torrent of hundreds of notifications. The screen was a blinding cascade of text previews, WhatsApp alerts, and missed calls. OMG, Caroline, have you seen this? Is this you? Tell me it's not you. You are all over the news. You need to call me now. The most numerous missed calls, 27 of them, were from Richard Finch. A cold dread, heavier and more potent than any anger, began to seep into her bones. She fumbled to open her web browser, her fingers trembling. The top news story on every single portal was her own face, twisted in an ugly sneer. Wealth manager fired after racist tirade goes viral. The headline was already a foregone conclusion. With a shaking hand, she clicked the video. She saw herself through the world's eyes for the first time. She heard her own voice dripping with a venomous condescension she hadn't recognized at the time. She saw her smug satisfaction as Leo was led away. She saw her utter loss of control as Captain Rostova calmly ejected her. It was a portrait of a monster. The person on the screen was ugly, entitled, and hateful, and it was, undeniably, her. She finally mustered the courage to call Richard Finch. He answered on the first ring. "Caroline," he said. His voice was not angry. It was Arctic cold, the sound of pure, unadulterated damage control. "Richard, I can explain," she began, her own voice sounding pathetic and weak to her ears. "It was taken out of context. This man, the CEO, he threatened me." "Stop, Caroline," he cut her off. "Just stop. Do you have any idea what you have done? We have lost 3 institutional clients this morning. 3, worth a combined $900 million under management. They cited the Covington incident in our firm's ethics clause. Our phones are ringing off the hook with journalists. Our lobby is filled with protesters. You haven't just embarrassed yourself, you have taken a wrecking ball to the reputation of a 100-year-old firm. You have become a liability of catastrophic proportions." "Richard, please," she begged, tears now streaming down her face, mixing with her expensive makeup. "I've given 20 years of my life to this firm." "And it took you 20 minutes to potentially destroy it," he retorted coldly. "The board held an emergency meeting 2 hours ago. Your employment with Covington and Finch is terminated, effective immediately. Your access has been revoked. A courier is on his way to your flat with the official paperwork and a severance agreement that includes a non-disclosure clause so restrictive you won't be able to mention our name in a job interview for the next decade. A security detail is clearing out your office as we speak. Goodbye, Carolyn." The line went dead. She sat in the back of the car, the phone slipping from her numb fingers. Her world hadn't just collapsed, it had been erased. The life she had built, stone by ruthless stone, was gone. The karma for Marcus Thorne was less explosive, but just as profound. Upon landing, he was met at the gate by a grim-faced HR manager and Captain Rostova, whose expression was unreadable. In a sterile, windowless office, he was formally handed a letter of indefinite, unpaid suspension. His wings were clipped. 2 days later, he sat in his small flat, the curtains drawn, and logged into his first session of the Sinclair Initiative. He was met by the face of Dr. Anya Sharma, a DEI consultant with kind eyes but a gaze that seemed to look right through him. "Let's start here, Marcus," she began, her voice gentle but firm. "When Ms. Covington first made her complaint, what was the specific threat you perceived from the young man in seat 2B? "He just didn't look right," Marcus mumbled. "The hoodie, the headphones. It was out of place. I was trying to prevent a scene." "But a scene did occur, didn't it?" Dr. Sharma pressed. "A much larger one. Let me ask you again. What did he do to make you feel he was a threat?" Marcus was silent, because the answer was nothing. The truth, stark and shameful, was that he had profiled a boy based on a rich woman's racist whisperings. And this was just the first hour of what he was told would be months of intensive re-education. It was the beginning of a long, painful journey of stripping away his own biases, layer by painful layer. In a luxurious suite at the Corinthia Hotel, Robert Sinclair finally sat down with his son. The city of London glittered below them, a peaceful panorama that stood in stark contrast to the day's turmoil. "I saw the video," Leo said quietly, breaking the silence. "And the news. About that woman, Caroline." "I know," Robert replied, turning to face him fully. "She lost everything," Leo continued, looking at his father, his eyes searching. "Because of us." "No, Leo," Robert corrected him gently but firmly. "She lost everything because of her, because of the choices she made. What we did, what I did, was simply refuse to let her get away with it. There's a critical difference." "That power you have, Dad," Leo said, his voice filled with a new kind of awe. "When you walked onto that plane, you didn't even have to yell. You just talked, and the world rearranged itself around you. I want to understand that." Robert sighed, a deep, weary sound. "That power, son, is a tool, one I've spent a lifetime building. It comes from money, reputation, and influence. And I used it today to protect you. I would burn down the world to protect you. But you must understand, it is a shield that 99% of the people who look like us do not have. What happened to you today happens to black men and boys every single day in countless ways. They get followed in stores. They get pulled over for no reason. They get called a threat for existing. But they don't have a CEO father with a $40 million contract to make it stop. He leaned forward, his expression intense. That's why I did what I did with the airline. Getting Marcus fired or suing Caroline would have been revenge. It would have felt good for a moment. But forcing them to create the initiative, that's about trying to fix the system that allows a Marcus and a Caroline to exist in the first place. It's about using the shield not just to protect ourselves, but to maybe, just maybe, make the world a little safer for those who don't have one. Power for its own sake is meaningless. It's purpose that gives it value. Leo was silent for a long time, absorbing the weight of his father's words. The anger he had felt was morphing into something more profound, a sense of responsibility. Do you feel bad for her at all? Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper. Robert considered the question carefully, looking out at the city lights. I don't feel pleasure in her suffering, he said finally. Her life is in ruins, and that's a tragedy of her own making. I feel a deep sadness that a person can live so long and cultivate so much bitterness and prejudice in their heart. What I feel is a sense of grim, necessary justice. A cancer was exposed. It was painful to cut it out, but it was necessary to stop the sickness from spreading. Her karma wasn't my doing, it was gravity. She spent her life climbing a ladder of arrogance and cruelty, and today she simply slipped and fell. All I did was refuse to catch her. Leo nodded slowly. He understood. The sting of humiliation had faded, replaced by the heavy mantle of a lesson learned. He had been kicked out of his seat, but in the ensuing fallout, his father had given him a new one, a seat at the table of understanding, where the complex currencies of power, prejudice, and justice were traded. It was a seat he would never be kicked out of again. And that's what happens when deep-seated prejudice collides with quiet power. And a father's love turns a moment of deep humiliation into a lesson the entire world got to see. The hard karma that hit Carolyn Covington wasn't just about losing her job. It was about the public exposure of a mindset that so often festers in the dark. Robert Sinclair didn't just demand an apology. He demanded accountability and forced an entire corporation to look in the mirror. It's a stark reminder that our actions, especially those fueled by bias, create ripples we can't control, and sometimes those ripples become a tidal wave. If you were as gripped by this story of instant karma and profound change as we were, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see that consequences are real. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another story of real-life drama and justice. What did you think of the father's response? Let us know in the comments below.